Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another video for World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV. I mean, it is related to both games, but it's predominantly a piece of news about World of Warcraft, and I think it is actually relative to Final Fantasy XIV. Just a little bit of context then. So this is a new post today, the 5th of February, or at least it was yesterday. It's new to me anyway on the 6th of February. A first look at housing. So I played World of Warcraft for about 7 or 8 years, something like that. I started, just for context, in the Burning Crusade at the start of that for my birthday back in 2007, and I played till about 2014 or so, something like that. Maybe even the year afterwards. Warlords of Draenor had come out and I was basically done with that game permanently. At the same time, side by side, I was also playing Final Fantasy XIV, as you know, for the past 11 years, and I've been in a unique situation, or maybe it's less unique than I think it is, of seeing both games and the strengths and weaknesses of both. And one of the things that's always attracted me to an MMORPG is the idea of living in that space and escapism and making it your own through that being the glamour system, or transmog system as it's called in World of Warcraft, where you customize your gear, you know, changing the color of those things. Collecting things. Essentially, I am a huge collector in video games. I love collecting tat effectively and displaying that for myself, for my own enjoyment. And that's what drives me to do most of the content in both of these games over the years. In Final Fantasy XIV, when we got player housing, it was a huge deal. A lot of it had huge limitations, including instancing. Obviously it meant that housing was not for everyone. Not everyone could get housing. And over the years, we've seen in Final Fantasy XIV quite a few changes to housing, but not to the actual integral way that it's made, right? The biggest changes we've had are to how quickly you can get a house. Originally in Final Fantasy XIV, you could walk up to a placard and immediately buy a house. It was a first come, first served basis. Every time there was a major patch or something that added housing, they would release it, and then you would teleport straight there, click on the placard and buy it. And effectively you were waiting for a timer to expire if somebody had become inactive in the game until they effectively lost their housing. They'd unsub from the game, they'd disappeared, and you were waiting there like everyone else, clicking the placard, hoping to actually be the one to win. Since that point, obviously it's come under a lot of criticism and a lot of changes over the years, to the point we now have a lottery-based system. The lottery-based system basically means everyone can click on a placard of a house they want to purchase. If it is available for sale, there's a little icon of an auction gavel next to it, and you put in a bid, basically the same as everyone else, and then when the actual draw comes up, they draw randomly whichever person wins, and you all pay the same amount of money, gil, or in-game currency. The direct translation would be gold to World of Warcraft, for the property's purchase cost. And that's how the housing is distributed. It is very hard to get larger property sizes. There are small, medium, and large plots in Final Fantasy XIV, and effectively housing is a bit of a premium extravagance. There are no current benefits from personal housing. This might change in the future, because currently free companies, or guild housing in Final Fantasy XIV, if we were to use a common word that would associate better between the two games, allows for workshop crafting, where you can build airships and things like that. But for personal housing, it has no physical benefits for the player other than a place to store items. Even saying that, though, it is still a very extreme luxury that not everyone can have. Conversely then, after I don't know how many years at this point, since World of Warcraft's first inception, many years ago, we have, as of the 5th of February, news about the first look at player housing, actual proper player housing in World of Warcraft. And it's really interesting. I wasn't going to make this video, but there's a few references indirectly to Final Fantasy XIV, and I was curious to see how they actually read. I've seen some people talk about this. So let's look at this. So This is posted by Blizzard Entertainment on the 5th, and it says, the construction of the new housing system in Azeroth is underway, and we're taking you behind the scenes to give you an early look at what the housing development team has been working on. Watch your step and don't mind the dust. Hard hats are not required. It says, welcome home adventurers. We're excited to kick off our first look at housing in World of Warcraft and share some of our philosophies and plans for this new feature with you. First up, we're focusing on high level design pillars for housing, as well as talking about a few key areas of housing as we lay the foundation for future discussions. We have lots to cover, so let's jump in. So the first bit, fortifying housing with pillars, says when developing such a large new feature, it's useful to start by defining its pillars. They help the development team to get on the same page before we start building, as well as providing a guiding light when making decisions and identifying priorities. It's important to note that whilst these pillars are broad in scope by their nature, they aren't all-encompassing. Just because something isn't mentioned in a pillar doesn't mean it's not an important detail or isn't part of the feature. So the 3 pillars for their housing, which is a very interesting thing to look at. Firstly then, the first pillar of housing for this game is boundless self-expression. So we've got a little bit of a concept image of housing here for the new rugged decor. It says boundless self-expression. Our highest priority is to allow players to build a house that shows off their own personal taste of their warbands, acts as a desired backdrop for role-playing, or just allows players to create something in a flight of fancy. The toolset should be easy enough for someone with no 3D experience to be comfortable with and use successfully, but it should also be powerful enough that players can surprise us with their creations or drill down to get the tiniest details just right. The gamut of decor options spans not just the cultures of Azeroth, but in many expansions of World of Warcraft as well. So basically they're talking about having no ability to create something, having something look good regardless of your skill level, but at the same time have the intricate levels of design that you can usually in Final Fantasy XIV we would have to exploit glitches and other kind of layered technologies of multiple items to achieve, right? So the finer details will make it so that you can make something extravagant. That's the plan. The second pillar then is deeply social. World of Warcraft is more fun with other players, and housing should be no different. While players can enjoy housing purely on their own, its systems are designed at a fundamental level to encourage interacting, playing, and progressing with friends, neighbors, guilds, and the wider community in a meaningful way. So as to how they will fulfill that is a big question. RP communities make Final Fantasy XIV's housing a big deal, right? There are entire like neighborhoods that people have set up in wards for events and things like that. There are museums, clubs, that kind of thing. So I'm guessing that's what they're leaning on. Maybe it's more of a social, like the player base actually creates the content for that, which is a side of WoW that I personally have never really seen outside of the obvious sort of RP that you hear about when Warcraft is brought up, right? The Goldshire type stuff. The long-lasting journey is the third pillar. Housing is being built as an evergreen addition to the game, with its own roadmap, reaching across multiple patches into future expansions. Housing isn't something players should expect to finish, but instead continually look forward to the next housing release, be it new content or systems. This is a long-term commitment for us as developers and offers players rewards along the way. So that's, you know, fundamentally doing a dungeon, getting a housing item, that kind of thing. Doing a thing, getting a reward, remembering it by storing a housing item. It says one important note, even though it's not an explicit pillar, wide adoption is a primary consideration for us as well. Most players should want a house in Azeroth, and if a player wants a house in Azeroth, they can have a house in Azeroth, apparently. Furthermore, housing is being designed to scale with the player's interest. If someone wants to spend dozens of hours a week on their house, that's great. If they're only interested in coming or going once or twice a month, that's great too. So, interesting, okay? Their idea that it's something that you would want to have. Okay, that's good. So that means making it attractive, right? Giving lots of rewards for it. So it says zoning in on home. So this is one of the important parts. We've seen a lot of discussion and speculation from the community on where players will be able to have houses. Blizzard says, we decided early on that there would be 2 housing zones available at launch, one for the Alliance and one for the Horde, with more possible places to live in the future. The Alliance zone takes inspiration from Elwyn Forest and touches of Westfall and Duskwood, and the Horde is inspired by Durotar, its coastline, and Ashara. There are 2 main reasons for this decision. Number 1, having many housing zones conflicts with the second pillar of designing a feature that is deeply social. In a world where players can live in many different zones, they become increasingly spread out, and even with aggressive sharding, the chance of seeing other players, much less interacting with them, drops quickly. Okay, that's an interesting point. And number 2, putting it bluntly, zones are a lot of work. We'd much rather do a great job with a smaller number of zones than do a passable job on a large number, or come up with solutions that take the player out of the world into their own personal instance of a zone. We chose these as our starting points because of how iconic they are for their respective factions and how much they feel like home to so many players already. We're excited for what we'll be able to accomplish with the 2 new zones, and we'll be sharing more on what this means in future updates. Okay, so they want this stuff to be accessible to everyone and super social, and they're making less of it at the start. I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're going to have a much more social focus on the housing, spreading it across the world makes no sense, especially when it's a new feature. But it looks like it's probably just going to expand in the future anyway to sort of like what 14 has done, right? In terms of multiple housing places. But we got to remember these are 2 very different games and there are different limitations. So let's read on. Outfitting your home. Similarly, there have been discussions in the community on whether housing will be pay to win or not, along with other conversations around real-world money. We've been very aligned in our internal conversations that housing is designed to be a primarily player-first and not revenue-first system. Housing will offer hundreds and hundreds of decorations and house customizations via in-game rewards. Will also offer a smaller number of items in the cash shop as well. This is comparable to how transmogs and pets are currently handled in the game versus the shop. We want to allow players to have as many options as possible for creating their perfect home in Azeroth. I mean, that's basically the same as 14 in that regard. There's not really any differences to that. I suppose it really depends on how much better things look on the cash shop, right? But usually that is the case. They always make the chase items something that you would buy or encourage to buy. But we'll see how the balance works on that. This is some concept art of some bits and pieces, which I don't know, kind of looks like the sort of scatter items you might see in an inn room or something like that, right? So this is the important bit. A home for everyone. This is the reason we made this video. As part of our focus on wide adoption, we wanted to ensure that housing is available to everyone. If you want a house, you can have a house. No exorbitant requirements or high purchase costs, no lotteries, and no onerous upkeep. And if your subscription lapses, don't worry, your house doesn't get repossessed, they say. Your houses are also shared amongst your warband, with your different characters being able to come and go as you see fit. Just so you know, a warband is your account, so when you log in, you have a multiple, lots of alts or whatever. That's a warband. It's your account. So your alt character can hang out in your alliance house without a problem, they say. Housing rewards are also shared across your warband, so you'll be able to use your decor collection no matter which character earns it, end quote. So a couple of things there that directly raise my eyebrows is the idea that this will be available to everybody, much like the garrison system they've done before. The idea that you're not going to lose your housing if your subscription ends, which is a lot of people in Final Fantasy XIV do tell me in comment section. The only reason I'm still keeping my sub between patches is because of housing, right? Because they don't want to lose their house and the progress they've made. So that's a big deal, and it does certainly feel like a sort of indirect call out from Blizzard here to Square Enix here, with especially when they're like no lotteries or onerous upkeep or high purchase costs with no subscription required. So interesting. Furthermore, it's not just warbands that cross factional lines, but friendships as well. So you'll be able to live in or visit your friends or guildmates' houses and their neighborhoods with minimal restrictions regarding their faction. For example, while it's not possible for your human character to buy a house in the Horde Zone, your troll character in the same warband can, and then your human can use it as if it was their own. So these things are all account shared. This is a big thing that I would love to see in Final Fantasy XIV. Housing items, things like that, they should be shared on your account. I know the focus on Final Fantasy XIV is to have the one character, and alts are not really like a thing, but people still make alts for various different reasons, be that RP, which is the sole thing that they're talking about here for Warcraft as well, which is arguably even bigger in Final Fantasy XIV, the RP community, right? I don't know which is bigger. I would wager that 14 has a higher, concentration of RP players than it does anything else, right? In if we were to compare the two games, right? I don't know the actual stats on that. I don't think anybody knows, but it feels like it's more of an RP friendly game. So for World of Warcraft to do this is a big deal, right? This could influence, hopefully this could influence Square Enix going forward. I think this is a really positive thing, and it's been such a long time since a competitor has done something better than, right? It's been a very long time since World of Warcraft, for example, could be used as an example of something that could be described as grass is greener content, right? It is potentially better on the other side. It hasn't been that way for a very long time for me personally, and I know several people who feel the same who came from World of Warcraft originally many years ago, and it came over to 14. This is an interesting turning point. That's what I'm trying to say. And then the last section, will you be my neighbor? Before we go, we want to mention the concept of neighborhoods as a small tease. Houses are organized into roughly 50 plot neighborhoods, letting players live next to each other, work together, and share in the rewards of being part of the neighborhood. Neighborhoods are instanced, but crucially also persistent, so your neighbors can be your neighbors for years to come or until one of you moves. Neighborhoods can also come in two flavors. We've got public neighborhoods, which the game's servers are responsible for creating as needing and maintaining. And there's also private neighborhoods created by groups of friends or guilds to inhabit, progress, and customize together. And they say, so whilst an individual player can have a house, a community can have a neighborhood. And they say this is just an initial look at the blueprint we've been working on for housing. There's a lot more ground to cover and details to get into, and we look forward to your thoughts and feedback as we share more articles in the future. End quote. So obviously this has gone down quite well with the Warcraft community today. A lot of people have been gravitating towards playing other games, right? Especially as Final Fantasy XIV goes from dips in content between major patches. Dawntrail was probably not received quite as well as a lot of people would have hoped, for many reasons we won't get into. But the thing is, they're approaching housing for the first time in, I have just an incalculable amount of time of people asking for it, and the best Warcraft could provide back in the day was bloody garrisons, and I couldn't stand the damn things. Some of you liked them. I could not stand them. They were horrible. It was like poor man's housing. So if they're going to be doing this properly, it sounds fantastic. And there's a lot that Square Enix could look at on this article and go, oh damn, if they actually pull this off, then this will be better housing, right? It also reminds me a little bit more like WildStar. You remember that game that got shut down a few years ago? That kind of housing, but on a much bigger scale, right? It has the potential with Blizzard money to be quite a success. I especially like the public and private neighborhood system. As you know, in Final Fantasy XIV, housing is a premium, right? It is hard to get. So there are all sorts of things that people do in nefarious ways to obtain housing. Originally, people, when they could, click on a placard and immediately get a house. A lot of people were relinquishing these things for money exchanges. There were entire guilds, or FCs as we call them in 14, buying up entire wards, right? There were people buying up entire spaces, and spaces were limited, on the actual server. So there are some people who got very angry and are continuously angry when people buy out an entire ward, hold on to these houses, and seemingly do nothing with them when they and themselves and their friends don't have somewhere that they can call their own. Especially when in 14 you have a much more focus on having a reason to have a house, right? You can actually create airships and send these things out. You can get large amounts of currency back from them. Airship and submersible missions, things like that. So to hear that Warcraft is going, here's what's wrong with Final Fantasy XIV's housing. There's not enough of it. Not everyone can get one. You're bound to your subscription. It's too expensive. And there's no way of keeping people happy whilst wanting to play with your friends by having houses all together. The way we're going to solve that is everybody's going to have sharded housing, and we're going to make it so that you can have private neighborhoods with your friends, bothering nobody at all. It remains to be seen if they can pull it off, but if they can, this is huge. This is absolutely huge. And I can imagine a lot of people probably gravitating towards this idea, and maybe even dipping their toe back into WoW, which is something I never thought I would say, because it doesn't sound like a big thing, but it is a big thing. Everybody wants, or not everybody, but there are a large amount of people, including myself, that look at the features in gaming like housing, the same way as we look at glamour, the same way as we look at collections of achievements and things like that, titles, housing items, having a place to put them. And it is a real turn-off when you have to pay a subscription to a game that perhaps you don't want to pay every month of the year to actually keep your house. You know what I mean? It's really interesting to me, and it does feel, even though it is obviously indirect and there's no proof that they're talking about specific games, when they mention lotteries and having to have a subscription, it's kind of obvious where they're coming from. So it'll be interesting to see if Final Fantasy XIV has any kind of answer to this, because I always thought that the best thing about 14 is that you can have a house, right? And there are very few MMOs on the market that are as big as these two games that has housing and that sort of amount of collection. World of Warcraft's transmog system has always been better than the glamour system. It's something I've always missed. But is this another thing that, I'm going to be jealous of? Probably. Honestly, it sounds amazing. But again, it's Blizzard Entertainment. Your mileage may vary. Let me know what you think about this. I'm sure I'm going to get people who are like, oh, you're talking positive about WoW. Yeah, I talk positive about games that make positive changes, regardless of what they are. I'm always interested to see how things go. And remember, without competition, you cannot get anywhere. Nothing ever gets developed. Nothing creative happens. Creative inspiration, is driven off of competition. You don't have new features in games without another game trying it and failing first, right? They both play off of each other, and World of Warcraft is a prime example of something that has cannibalized many ideas from other IPs, and invariably sometimes made them better. Not all the time, but definitely on the transmog side of things and the collection side of things and the toy box. A lot of that stuff is infinitely better than what we have in 14. So I'm curious about this, and I'm also curious what you think about this. Yeah, let me know. I'm really, really pumped to see if Square Enix go, maybe we need to look at housing again. Is it possible? Could we see something like this in 14? Are the dreams of private neighborhoods, like private wards, possible in our game? I don't know. I'm sure there's some technical limitations that would prevent it or something, but saying that, World of Warcraft is ancient now, right? This is a very old game, and it's teaching itself new tricks. So Who knows, right? Anyway, link in the description to this post. I'm very curious as to what you say, and we might do a follow-up based on your comments. And yeah, what an interesting time to be alive. What an interesting time. I'll be interested to see how many people are like, actually, from an RP perspective, I think I might try out that game again. It could happen. Anyway, much love. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.